Hello, great community, and all of you at this exciting AI and education meeting. And before I begin, let me just give a big shout out to the organizers because, this takes a lot of effort and passion, and it's a wonderful team, isn't it? Marge Schiller and Edith Beatty and Champlain's Lindsay Gotwin. And Marge, I love the trailer you just sent me on Stan and the Four Fantastic Powers. The first, well, I think it's the first children's book on appreciative inquiry for kids. And I would love to spend a few minutes with you and talk to you and invite you into a project. It's a project that is giving me more hope about our world and our world's future than anything I've worked on. It's a project that might be the most important project I've ever worked on. And it's a project that could affect the lives of millions and millions of children in a positive way, in a deeply positive way. My name is David Cooperrider. I'm a professor at Case Western Reserve University. I teach in the School of Management and Leadership. I'm author of a book called Appreciative Inquiry, A Positive Revolution and Change. And I'm coming to you today in collaboration with two institutions that are beginning to kind of help form and shape this and lead this effort. The first is the Meyerson Foundation in Cincinnati, the Meyerson Foundation and the Meyerson Academy. Tremendous leaders in character strengths in schools. And then the second key partner here is the Champlain College, the Bob Stiller School of Business, the David L. Cooperrider Center for Appreciative Inquiry. So just a little bit more on my passion and my background, because I think it'll help you understand where we're heading with this whole thing. But for the past 30 years, my focus has been on studying successful, very successful change and developing the tools and methods and so on. But not just successful change, but literally, but more importantly, thinking about change at the scale of the whole. That seems to be the real agenda of our day. When I speak with top leaders in almost any industry or the United Nations or corporations like Apple, there obviously change is incredibly important in all our schools and hospitals and so on. But I think the senior leadership question has shifted. It's no longer a question simply about change, but it's change at the scale of the whole. How do we move a whole 67,000 person telecommunications company together? How do we move a whole Northeast Ohio economic region together? How do we move a whole state of Massachusetts to overcome all of the polarizations and begin to develop a common ground vision of a renewable energy future together? I think that's the real question of change. It's the real question of change in our school systems as well. And in so many quarters, when we think about systemic change, there's a sense of despair. Think about how so many of us feel in terms of our politics. How are we going to move together? That's kind of a central agenda of our day. It's been exciting as we've developed tools like the Appreciative Inquiry Summit methodology. It's a methodology for doing planning and designing and strategic level change work with the whole system in the room, all the different stakeholders in a very inclusive way. And what we're discovering is that it brings out the best in human systems. Somehow, between the appreciative inquiry process and somehow with wholeness, the whole system in the room, we're able to work just incredible projects at a level of scale that, quite frankly, my sense of hope about what we're capable of doing goes up every time we're part of one of these efforts. Kofi Annan, a few years ago when he was Secretary General of the United Nations and wanting to push the pedal to the floor on eradicating extreme poverty in the world. And he's saying in the back of his mind, there's no way we're going to do that unless we have great business models and entrepreneurship and economic empowerment and dignified work. So he was assembling 700 to 1,000 of the top CEOs in the world to unite the strengths of markets with those kind of agenda items. And he said, David, do you think we could use appreciative inquiry to redo the way we do world summits? Usually world summits are talking heads or pre-negotiated agreements, but not collaborative planning. And so, what a privilege it was to bring a team together to work with him on this effort. Today there's 8,000 corporations that continue the work of this, what's called now the United Nations Global Compact. I mention all that to you. Bob Stiller at Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, it used appreciative inquiry to bring customers into the room, to bring supply chain partners, bring farmers from all different parts of the world growing coffee, to say, let's plan together and let's design together. So just a lot of exciting work happening. I share that with you because there's another source of hope that I have, and a few years ago, I call it a positive revolution in research in the human sciences, and it really is tectonic. And what happened was, in about the year 2000, is Marty Seligman, he was president of the American Psychological Association. Hundreds and thousands of researchers working on our study of the human sciences. And what was clear to Marty, and what he noticed, is that for the last 100 years or so, psychology and all the humans have been focused on human deficiency and what's wrong with the human being. So we've learned a lot about depression and codependency and anger and fear and on and on and on. And he started, there was one statistic that I read or heard where out of 44,000 journal articles, 98.9% of those were on what's wrong with the human being, the studies of anger and fear and depression. And we didn't have any studies of hope, inspiration, and joy. And so Marty said, let's at least have a 50-50. Let's create a positive psychology that's focusing on what gives life to the human being and what are the characteristics of the good life, and how do we propel people beyond just, a negative state to flourishing and thriving in their full potential. Anyway, many of you know about that field that's been emerged, and I just have to say the knowledge generation and the good science is enormous. A privilege that I had was then Marty and I were invited together to go to Australia. We were asked to do 11 speeches across the country, Marty focusing on the individual and me focusing on the institution, and the response was so powerful. And then we visited some schools that Marty helped catalyze in terms of real pioneering work in the educational field with positive education, Geelong Grammar School and St. Peter's College in Australia. And we started seeing so much potential, and one of the ministers of education could sense the potential of maybe raising this as a national level discussion. And I felt like the timing was right in our own country as well, and other countries. Mexico is really doing some tremendous work. And so Marty and I started talking. He said, but Dave, we don't really have the tools for moving whole systems. This requires an acceleration. Maybe we could use the Appreciative Inquiry Summit methodology. So that's where that discussion began to think about, can we pioneer a national level kind of summit to really move things forward? John Dewey said, education is not preparation for life, that education is life. What's occurring is that as human flourishing goes up, then guess what happens to math, reading, and writing as well. The other part of it is also, it says that a teacher's ability to flourish is important to a child's ability to flourish, and a teacher's ability to flourish is dependent also on having an institution that flourishes, institutions that are fully human in a developmental sense. And so my premise is also that as we discover and design more positive workplaces like we've done at places like Johnson & Johnson, well, why couldn't that be done also with schools? Because the premise is, as the institution becomes more of a workplace where you can flourish, then so too will that spread through the classroom and the teacher and so on. And obviously every institution in society, has a moral obligation, a real moral obligation to promote human flourishing. and none more so than those responsible for educating young people, especially our families and our schools. So the question before us is simply this: how might we unite the very, very best in education today, use an appreciative inquiry, lift up all the best practices and breakthroughs that are happening in education in general, and link all of these innovations with the best in the field of positive psychology and all the resources and so on? And how do we accelerate all of this to make these extraordinary resources that are there? And school systems, whole school systems, our urban school systems, you know, lots of them being abandoned, at least in terms of tax base and so on. So anyway, that discussion with Marty was precious. The whole idea that maybe it's time to create an action-oriented, a design-oriented, collective action kind of whole system in the room summit to bring all of this together. And right now the topic, or the way we're framing it, and this will go through revision with the steering committee and so on, but a starting topic is accelerating the future of positive education, coming together to unite the best in education with the best in the positive psychology of human strengths, a National Appreciative Inquiry Summit for advancing positive education. So what can come out of a summit? I think a movement can come out of the summit. I sense an urge on the part of a lot of leaders to lift up our potential to create the finest educational systems that we're capable of creating. You know, we're going to come out with real action. So people are tired of going to conferences where there's such a good dialogue and conversation and so many good ideas, but then no action, and there's a conference fatigue. Well, Appreciative Inquiry Summit goes way beyond that conference fatigue because it moves into this design phase. I anticipate that we'll come out of the summit with 20-some working groups, really significant ones, on policy, on teacher curriculum, on things like, well, I could see a big school system like Chicago or Houston Independent School System raising their hand saying, make us a pilot, let's really take it seriously in this school system and then spread everything we learn. It's telling me that the timing is right. There is a readiness and the resources and so on to accelerate this positive education, as well as the positive institutions of the school systems itself. Business leaders like Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, again, a major pioneer in large group planning with appreciative inquiry, huge successes in the corporation, but they'd bring customers into the room for the planning, supply chain partners, coffee growers from every part of the world to have full voice and to bring all the knowledge together to create and envision a better future. So, let me just say that I'd love to invite you in as a thought partner. And I think this is a task of historic opportunity and importance. I think it's the kind of work where we'll say at the end of our lives, I know for me it's certainly true, I think we'll say, my life had meaning because I was part of that project. And I think that's telling. So it's just a couple ways that you can help us. Help us identify key stakeholders. Again, the room needs to be filled with regulators and superintendents and top principals and school systems that want to move in this direction, and business leaders and the faith community, design firms. Think about stakeholders in terms of a mix that can create real power with information, with creativity, with a commitment to the best in education. Help us think about celebrities, for example, or funders or investors. Help us think about corporations who care. One of my experiences is that business leaders get it. They say, this is so important for my own child. I want teachers who can see the best in that child. I want teachers who can lift up the true, the good, the better, the possible, and help make exciting learning. Help us make this available to other countries. Our intention, again, is to work it at a national level because of all the context and culture and specificity involved in educational systems. But we want to give away all the tools and all the knowledge that's created through this project. Help us unite with top thought leaders in education and be part of our community. Let me just end by saying, again, at a personal level, I think that this might be the most important piece of work that I've been involved with, and I've been involved with some really, really exciting and impactful things. But I feel like we have the opportunity to affect the lives of millions of children, and it's all there. The timing is right. And I love Pablo Casal's, the celloist. I love his comment.